So the breakout session that I was moderating along with Warren Casey was on combinatorial NAMs, and we had a lot of questions and comments from the participants, and we're going to sort of break it down into 3 different slides that I'm presenting. So the first one kind of addresses unmet regulatory needs and or questions of interest. And initially, it started out with a discussion about what's the definition of NAMs. I think that that's kind of like a typical question that starts everything, because there are so many different definitions of NAMs, and there isn't yet consensus. Although many of them kind of say similar things, there are differences across jurisdictions and sort of areas of interest and everything. But I think that that's not something that obviously we're going to solve, and so people feel that maybe for their particular purposes they can sort of define the NAMs the way that they think they need to define them, because it's just too hard to get consensus right now. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be consensus. And actually during the break I was talking with somebody, they were saying that gene tox assays and things like that have always been done. Are those NAMs? I said that no, they're not NAMs, but they are in vitro methods, but they're not NAMs. Even like tissue cross-reactivity assays are not NAMs. And it's like, well, what makes it NAM? I said, well, the N is new, has to be new. So I don't know whether that helps or not. Anyway, then the question came up about what's a combinatorial NAM. And so because people were asking whether putting multiple organs on a chip, that would be a combinatorial. And we said, no, that's not the way that it's seen right now. It's more kind of combining an in silico with an in vitro method. So that's a combinatorial NAM. And so after we talked a little bit about that, one of the questions that was raised was that, to qualify and validate these methods, obviously the combinatorial NAMs, don't you have to validate each one separately first? Because that's kind of like a duh thing. Like if they're both validated, then together maybe they're. And I think that we spent quite a bit of time talking about that and saying that, yes, that could be the case, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You don't have to maybe qualify or validate the individual methods, as long as you can show that together they work in a certain way, and you then sort of qualify the method that way. And so I think that the question came up also at that time about, in what context are we talking when we're talking about qualifying these combinatorial NAMs? And it was clarified that the perspective is for really, if you want to come in with a qualification package, that's when it matters. Otherwise, you can combine NAMs as much as you want in an application. That kind of goes back to a weight of evidence approach, using different types of endpoints to answer a specific question. That's always been done. It can continue to get done. But if you seek a qualification of a combination of methods, then you need to sort of think about what would be the criteria that would be used to qualify your combinatorial NAM. And obviously the combinatorial NAMs can be used for a number of different purposes to answer questions about safety or efficacy. But I think a big focus is on reducing animal testing. And so I think that one of the topics that was brought up was potentially how could combinatorial NAMs be used to reduce, for example, long-term animal testing, maybe the long-term NHP studies. So that's sort of a topic that potentially could be discussed further. And there was also a lot of interest in people sharing data, because there seemed to be a different level of knowledge about what data are available and where these data are stored. And so this kind of takes me to the next slide, which kind of talked about the opportunities. And so I think in this particular sort of slide, I highlight some of the points came up, is that using maybe lessons learned from the qualification packages that have already gone through the process, in order to develop a document that could be shared so that people could actually use that, what they learned. I think yesterday we discussed it during the panel discussion that there's a lot of learning obviously involved. Not only that FDA needs to learn, I think that's been a lot of the focus. FDA needs to be trained, FDA needs to learn, but then I think that also people developing platforms also need to learn what it is that FDA needs. And I think that we can both benefit from having this kind of interaction. And so maybe writing down these lessons learned based on what's already been, the LOIs that have gone through the process versus those that didn't go through the process. That can help in, if we are to get to combinatorial NAMs, that's going to be a lot more complicated, then it would be good to highlight, what some of these things are. So that's an opportunity for the future. Developing training programs for reviewers and making this is something that was brought up by one participant, and we talked about the fact that some training programs have already been put into place for reviewers to become familiar with NAMs, but obviously this is something that needs to kind of be an ongoing process, and it is going to be an ongoing process. But clearly, FDA has been doing it with help from industry, who from the IQ and PS. From industry sort of participants who are using these NAMs in regulatory decision making. Now, of course, if there are other opportunities to have people developing NAMs wanting to get involved in some of these training programs, I think that would be certainly useful, because it would then help in the evaluation of the packages that come in, the more we have subject matter experts. Also, I think, let me see, provide resources for how to reduce instead of endpoint. I'm not sure what that was in regard to, but that's okay. We also talked about opportunities that are there for people to meet with FDA when they have questions. We mentioned, I think yesterday I mentioned the Interact meeting. There's another meeting called the CPIM meeting, and so these things we can give you more information about how to the websites where these are listed. But I think they're called Type D meetings, where people can request to meet with FDA on their NAM if it's not specific to any type of application. So I think in order to find out whether you have a combinatorial NAM or you want to qualify something, there is an opportunity to come and meet with the FDA to get advice before you even put your LOI together. And I think that that's something that people should potentially look into. We were asked about FDA guidance, whether that's something that's going to be in the works or is in the works. And I mentioned that there is a guidance document that's very near to being published. We're waiting for the final clearance, but it's really the focus of that guidance is really to provide some validation criteria, and that is intended to help describe the format and the content of any study report that uses a NAM. So if that is the idea that we have, is that if we make that a little clearer to people, then they are going to be more likely to submit studies reports to us, because they know the types of things that we're looking for. Then as they start submitting more data to us, then we will be able to compare across submissions, and then we'll be able to summarize that and provide then more guidance to people on specific modalities. So there's this constant opportunity to work with stakeholders in order to collect information and then give more advice on how to give us better information each time. And it's going to be an iterative process where there's going to be incremental progress that's made. There was also a discussion about creating potentially a registry of NAMs. This is obviously, it's an interesting idea, and it would be very useful, obviously. But there was a mention that there are already a lot of data that are out there, and maybe there needs to be some way of combining all of that so that people maybe kind of go to a centralized place. But obviously, FDA would not be able to provide information about proprietary drugs that use NAMs into that kind of registry. But certainly, if manufacturers and method developers want to do that, that's something that could be done. I think the sort of 3Rs Collaborative certainly has on their website a technology hub where they do talk about the members of their organization, like 30 or 40 members that they have, and what methods they have available to them. So that's one place where some NAMs are mentioned, but I don't think that it addresses a lot of the other NAMs that are being developed academically and everything. So I think that there was interest in knowing how to find a list of potential NAMs that are being either developed, at what stage of development they are at, and being able to see whether that's something that people want to use, or whether it's for their research work or if it's for regulatory purposes. And then the last topic that we talked about were gaps and challenges. And so again, I think validating tools to kind of collect information. Obviously, you can't have a conversation anymore these days without talking about AI and so people want to use a lot of that technology to try and help in reaching the sort of validation status. But of course, in my opinion, you kind of have to know what you're looking for before you start using AI to collect that information. That is not always obvious, especially when you're looking at study reports that are written in a narrative format, and you have to kind of compare a lot of data points simultaneously and look at trends, across doses and in different organs and across studies, and use kind of your sort of knowledge of a particular sort of disease or a drug category or something. So I think once we can figure some of those things out, maybe we might be able to use more AI to mine and our data to make this type of work easier, and then reach validation status in a much more effective way. But right now it's a little bit more labor intensive, and it has to be kind of done by a person. Right, we currently have limited information to provide through guidance, but we are trying to do that. Again, as I said, there's one guidance that's close to being done. We anticipate that that will lead to future guidances as well that are going to be more focused on specific modalities. So maybe spheroids and MPS. So the first one is kind of more general with NAMs, and maybe each type, and then maybe by organ system. So I think that that's where we would like to eventually go, because that, I think, would be able to help people that are developing these platforms as well as the qualification packages to know what are the things to focus on. And obviously the data sharing of proprietary data is not possible, but there might be opportunities to sort of use anonymized data and try to kind of share with our stakeholders what lessons are learned, and kind of comes back to what we learned versus what industry is learning, and trying to put all of that together. So that's kind of an opportunity, but there are challenges associated with that. And I think that one of the things about these shared databases is really the data entry into these databases is obviously going to be a challenge, because if you have different people entering data, that's clearly going to create a problem. So while having these registries is going to be something good, we need to figure out how we're going to develop those things. So I think these were the main topics that we talked about. So thank you.